in readily accessible savings. So today we are getting our financial affairs in order with Steve Overton, Pamela McCoy, and Brian Mahoney. And first we're going to talk about retirement and people procrastinating because they don't want to think, A, about retirement or how they're going to survive in retirement. Steve, I'll start with you on this one. Are you finding that a lot of people are just not prepared?
Well, the clients that I have are trying to be prepared, but I will have someone come in. I had a couple come in and he's 44 years old, she's 43 years old. They didn't have any money saved at all. It's like, wow, my window's narrowing. And when that stat you read about $500, what that means is they're quickly on the way to having debt if they don't already. When the air conditioner breaks or the car needs a big transmission replacement or something, that's going to be a Visa card expense, and that's where you get on a slippery slope.
Yeah, let me add to that. I mean, when you get into it, those people that properly start saving in the mid-20s, if you're waiting to your 30s and 40s, you're going from a 10% saving rate for the rest of your life from the 20s till you get into the 30s and 40s. You're going to have to ramp it up to 20, 30, and if you get into the 50s, you're going to have to ramp it up to 40% of your income, and that's really hard to make up. So that procrastination puts you way behind the proverbial 8 ball.
I know somebody in their 50s who at this stage of the game has absolutely no savings and no assets. And it's not an unusual case, I don't think.
And speaking to the initial entry about the $500, if you don't have an emergency fund, to his point, you're going to go straight to a credit card. That's the interest rate. That's taking money away from your retirement.
Well, we know that a lot of people who are in retirement are really struggling. And a lot of people are saying now, I can't afford to retire, but those who are but want to still generate some income, what advice do you have for them?
Well, there are a number of things that do pay income. A lot of people rely on bond funds. You have to be very careful. Bonds are sensitive to interest rate, but bond funds pay yields ranging from 1.5 to right up to 7.5. But again, it depends on the person. It's not suitable for everyone. There are other securities that do pay income. So even though bank rates are quite low, there are some things you can buy that do pay interest. You just have to pay attention to them so your principal is relatively stable.
Any advice for people, apart from going over to the fast food restaurant saying, okay, I need to pick up some extra money?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you're going to look at is, we were discussing variable annuities out there. There's some very scary variable annuities out there, and there's some very appropriate depending on the amount of savings you put aside. But as you're looking at your total portfolio, assuming that you weren't one of the procrastinators, and you put everything together, then you're looking at your total return. So as the portfolio is put together for you, pulling out that total return so it's just not an income piece that you're pulling out.
Let's talk about long-term care. I know a lot of people aren't really concentrating a lot on who's going to look after them in the long term. So what do you advise for that?
Well, of course, Medicare is not going to pay for a nursing home unless you're in there to be rehabilitated and come back out into the real world. And so who will pay for that? You're either going to have long-term care insurance, or you're going to pay right out of your pocket, or you're going to have to go to an attorney who specializes in elder law, and he will get you eligible for public assistance. Those are basically the three approaches.
And it boils down to planning, and when you're talking about long-term care, it's no different than any other kind of insurance. You need to evaluate what's available in your area. You might find even in some areas the care that you may need may not even be available in your area. So then you have to factor relocation and all those other things that you may not be thinking about in terms of long-term.
A lot of people don't like to think about writing a will, but it's so very important.
So important.
Talk a little bit about that. Wills, trusts, power of attorney.
Those are some of the important legal documents that everyone should have. I mean, if you don't have a will, inevitably, and I think a lot of people, the misconception is, I don't have millions, I don't have lots of money, so a will is not really for me. But it really doesn't matter how much money you have. It's your money, and you should determine where those funds and your assets should go upon your departure. And without a will, the state might decide.
The state definitely will decide if you don't have a will, and they don't always agree with what you might have had in mind. And when things don't have a will, they just take longer. They take longer, and people just give up, Brian. You've seen that. You may have an asset at some distant place, like a large trustee or somebody holding onto a stock that you might have got from an insurance policy or something, and you don't even know where to begin to get that out of there. If the first thing they're going to want to know is, did you have a will? You have to go open a probate estate to get what you need to get that stock out of there.
And once you get them in place, I think there's two things that predominantly that, well, if I start discussing the will, that I'm going to die. And that is very rare that it happens. That's going to say it doesn't. But it's really about putting the things in place that are going to situate your family. You've worked all of these years. You've built up this nest egg. This is that last piece of puzzle. You may have life insurance, but if you're not prepared for how everything's going to be distributed and laying it out. We have some unbelievable attorneys throughout the United States that are going to help you and do it at a fair price.
Really quickly, credit repair companies. There are a lot of them out there.
A lot of them out there, and I have to stress against them, actually. Credit repair companies, a lot of them, you have to be sure to read the fine print. The promises that a lot of them make, and I won't say all, but the majority make, are promises that they can't really see through. And when it comes to repairing your credit or you're having financial difficulty, you can communicate directly with your creditors. And they're more than willing to work with you and come up with workout plans. It's no advantage to a creditor to take a loss. And so if we can come to something, some kind of amiable agreement, then why wouldn't they? So.
Okay. Well, Steve Overton, Pamela McCoy, and Brian Mahoney, good advice. Thank you all very, very much for coming in today. And we will have more with our panel next.